The dust swirled in lazy circles across the main street of Cedar Flats as Sam Brennan stepped down from his horse, his boots hitting the hard-packed earth with the confidence of a man who owned half the county. The afternoon sun beat mercilessly on his broad shoulders, darkening the sweat stains already visible through his cotton shirt. At 42, Sam carried himself with the bearing of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted, when he wanted it. The Vasquez Cantina squatted like a tired dog at the end of the street, its adobe walls cracked from years of desert wind and winter freeze. Sam had been here twice before, once to collect on smaller debts, and once to make it clear that his patience had limits. Today would settle matters permanently. Inside, the cantina was mercifully cool and dim. The smell of beans, corn tortillas, and stale beer hung heavy in the air. Miguel Vasquez sat at a corner table, his weathered hands wrapped around a clay mug, his eyes avoiding Sam's gaze. The old Mexican looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. "Brennan," Miguel said quietly, not rising from his seat. "I've been expecting you." Sam pulled out a chair and sat down without invitation, his pale blue eyes never leaving Miguel's face. "Then you know why I'm here. 3 months, Miguel. 3 months past due on $800. See, I know." Miguel's voice carried the weight of defeat. "The drought had killed most of the cattle. The rest, they were stolen by raiders 2 weeks ago. I got nothing left to give you, amigo." "Don't call me that." Sam's voice was quiet, but carried the chill of winter wind. "We're not friends, Miguel. We're business partners, and you failed to hold up your end." From the back room came the soft sound of footsteps, and Sam's attention was drawn to a figure emerging from the shadows. A woman, perhaps 28, moved with a grace that seemed out of place in the rough cantina. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, revealing high cheekbones and intelligent brown eyes that met Sam's gaze directly, a boldness that surprised him. Her dress was simple but clean, a deep blue that complemented her olive complexion. "Elena," Miguel said softly. "This is Sam Brennan, the man I told you about." Elena nodded slightly but said nothing. Sam studied her face, noting the proud set of her jaw and the way she held herself, not cowering like most Mexican women did in his presence. There was something else in her expression, something he couldn't quite read. Intelligence, certainly, but also a kind of watchful wariness. "Your daughter?" Sam asked Miguel, though he kept his eyes on Elena. "My son's widow," Miguel replied. "Carlos, he died of fever last spring. Elena, she helped me run the cantina, but..." He spread his hands helplessly. Sam leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his weathered features. "Well now, that changes things considerably." He looked Elena up and down with the calculating gaze of a man appraising livestock. "Can she cook? Keep house?" Elena's nostrils flared slightly, but she remained silent. Miguel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "See, she can do all those things. But Brennan, she is not part of our business. She is now." Sam's voice cut through Miguel's protest like a blade. "I need a wife to manage my household, and you need your debt forgiven. Seems like Providence has provided a solution." "No," Elena spoke for the first time, her voice carrying a slight accent but clear and firm. "I am not property to be traded." Sam's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. "Everything's property, sweetheart, if the price is right. And your father-in-law here has set your price at $800 plus interest." Elena turned to Miguel, speaking rapidly in Spanish, her voice rising with anger. Sam caught enough words to understand she was protesting, but Miguel's responses grew increasingly desperate. Finally, the old man's shoulders sagged in defeat. "She says yes," Miguel whispered. "I said no such thing," Elena snapped, switching back to English. "I said I would rather work as a servant in your house than become your wife." "That's not how this works," Sam said, standing up and towering over her. "You'll be my wife, properly and legally, or Miguel here will find himself facing the territorial marshal for defaulting on a legal debt, and we both know what happens to Mexican debtors who can't pay." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elena's face paled slightly, but her chin remained raised. She understood the reality as well as any frontier woman. Miguel would lose everything, and likely face imprisonment or worse. The law favored men like Brennan, and everyone in the territory knew it. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked quietly. "You just did." Sam reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I took the liberty of having Judge Morrison draw up the marriage contract. We'll be wed tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. You'll come with me to the ranch immediately after." Elena stared at the contract as if it were a snake. "And if I run?" Sam's expression hardened. "Then Miguel pays in other ways, and I'll find you anyway." This territory's not that big, and I know every sheriff, every marshal, every bounty hunter from here to El Paso. You'd be brought back and things would go much harder for everyone involved." The cantina fell silent except for the buzzing of flies and the distant sound of horses moving down the main street. Elena looked from the contract to Miguel's anguished face, then back to Sam's implacable stare. In that moment, Sam saw something flicker in her dark eyes. Not defeat, but calculation, like she was memorizing his face, his words, filing away information for some future use. "Very well," she said finally. "I accept your terms." Sam nodded with satisfaction and tucked the contract back into his pocket. "Smart woman. Judge Morrison will be expecting us at 10 sharp. Don't be late." As he turned to leave, Elena's voice stopped him at the door. "Mr. Brennan?" When he looked back, she was standing perfectly straight, her hands clasped in front of her. "What exactly do you expect from this marriage?" "I expect a wife who knows her place," he replied. "Someone to cook my meals, clean my house, and warm my bed. In return, you'll have a roof over your head and protection. It's more than most women in your situation could hope for." Elena nodded slowly. "I understand. And you expect complete obedience?" "I expect you to remember who owns what in this arrangement." "Oh, I will," Elena said softly. "I'll remember everything." There was something in her tone that made Sam pause, but he couldn't put his finger on what bothered him about her response. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat in a mocking salute and walked out into the blazing afternoon heat, already planning how he would integrate his new wife into the running of his ranch. Behind him, Elena stood in the doorway of the cantina, watching his retreating figure with eyes that held secrets Sam Brennan could never imagine. The morning air carried the scent of sage and dust as Elena stood before the cracked mirror in her small room above the cantina. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned her dark hair into a simple bun, leaving a few strands to frame her face. The white dress she wore had belonged to her mother, the only thing of value she owned that connected her to a past Sam Brennan knew nothing about. Miguel knocked softly on the door. "Mija, it's time." Elena took one last look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back wore the expression of someone preparing for battle, not a wedding. She touched the small leather pouch hidden beneath her dress, feeling the familiar weight of the turquoise stone inside, a gift from her grandmother, carved with symbols that would mean nothing to white eyes, but everything to the people who had raised her mother. "Elena?" Miguel's voice carried worry and guilt in equal measure. "I'm ready," she said, though she wondered if anyone could truly be ready for what lay ahead. The walk to Judge Morrison's office took only minutes, but it felt like hours. Cedar Flats was already awake and bustling, with merchants opening their shops and cowboys heading out for the day's work. Several townspeople stopped to stare as Elena passed, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. News traveled fast in small towns, and everyone knew about Sam Brennan's unusual debt collection. Judge Morrison's office occupied the front room of his house, a modest building that served as the unofficial courthouse for the territory. The judge himself was a thin, nervous man who had learned long ago not to question Sam Brennan's business dealings too closely. Sam was already there, dressed in his best black suit, his sandy hair slicked back with pomade. He looked like a successful rancher about to close an important deal, which, Elena supposed, was exactly what he was doing. "Ah, Miss Vasquez," Judge Morrison said, consulting his pocket watch. "Right on time. Shall we begin?" The ceremony was brief and businesslike. Judge Morrison read from a worn book, his voice droning through words about love, honor, and obedience. Elena spoke her vows in a clear, steady voice, her eyes fixed on a point just over Sam's shoulder. When it came time to say, "I do," she met his gaze directly, and Sam saw again that flicker of something unreadable in her dark eyes. "You may kiss your bride," the judge announced. Sam leaned down and pressed his lips to Elena's in a kiss that was more about possession than affection. Her lips were warm but unresponsive, and when he pulled away, her expression hadn't changed. "Mrs. Brennan," Sam said, testing the sound of it, "has a nice ring." "Sigh," Elena replied quietly. "It does." They signed the papers, Miguel serving as witness with shaking hands. As they prepared to leave, Judge Morrison pulled Sam aside. "You sure about this, Sam? Taking on a Mexican wife? Some folks might not take kindly to it." Sam's expression hardened. "Any man who has a problem with my wife has a problem with me. I trust that won't be an issue." The judge quickly shook his head. "No, no issue at all. Just looking out for you, that's all." Outside, Sam's wagon waited, loaded with Elena's few belongings, a small trunk, a wooden box, and a bundle wrapped in colorful cloth. Miguel helped her up onto the seat, his eyes wet with unshed tears. Vaya con Dios, mija, he whispered, pressing a small envelope into her hand. Remember what I taught you about surviving among wolves. Elena squeezed his hand briefly. Gracias, abuelo. Take care of yourself. As the wagon pulled away from Cedar Flats, Sam glanced at his new wife. She sat ramrod straight, her hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape roll by with intense concentration. She seemed to be memorizing every rock, every tree, every bend in the trail. Something interesting out there? Sam asked. I'm learning the way to my new home, Elena replied. It's important to know the land. Smart thinking. Most women don't pay attention to such things. Elena turned to look at him. Most women haven't lived the life I have. There was something in her tone that made Sam curious. And what kind of life is that? A hard one, she said simply, then turned back to studying the terrain. The Brennan ranch sprawled across a valley between two low ridges, with the main house sitting on a slight rise that commanded a view of the surrounding grasslands. It was an impressive spread, bigger than Elena had expected. Cattle dotted the landscape like dark specks, and she could see several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived. 2,000 head of cattle, Sam said with obvious pride. Best grazing land in 3 counties. The house has 6 rooms, including a proper kitchen with a cast-iron stove brought all the way from Denver. Elena nodded, taking in details he wasn't mentioning. The positioning of the buildings, the sight lines to the surrounding hills, the location of the well. Old habits from a childhood spent learning to read the land for signs of danger or opportunity. The house itself was solidly built of local stone and timber, with a wide front porch and real glass windows. Luxuries on the frontier. Sam helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist longer than necessary. Welcome home, Mrs. Brennan. Inside, the house was well appointed, but bore the marks of a man living alone. The furniture was sturdy, but arranged without thought for comfort or beauty. Dust had settled on surfaces, and the kitchen showed signs of hurried, careless meals. The previous housekeeper left last month, Sam explained. Mexican woman who got ideas above her station. I expect you'll do better. Elena walked through the rooms, her fingers trailing over surfaces, opening cabinets, examining the layout. In the bedroom, their bedroom, she paused at the large window that looked out over the valley. Beautiful view, she said. Best in the territory. Sam moved up behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. This is where you'll be spending most of your time now. With me. Elena didn't pull away, but Sam could feel the tension in her muscles. Mr. Brennan. Sam, he corrected. We're married now. Sam, she repeated carefully, I want to be clear about expectations. I will keep your house, cook your meals, and fulfill my wifely duties. But I am not your servant, and I am not your property, despite what you may think. Sam's hands tightened slightly on her shoulders. You're whatever I say you are, Elena. The sooner you understand that, the easier this will be for both of us. Elena turned in his grip, her dark eyes meeting his pale ones. And what if I have things to teach you as well? Such as patience, she said quietly, and the difference between owning something and truly possessing it. Sam stared down at her, puzzled by her words but stirred by something in her manner, a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with her situation. We'll see about that. That evening, Elena prepared their first meal together in the ranch house kitchen. As she worked, she hummed softly under her breath, a melody Sam didn't recognize, haunting and somehow wild. When he asked about it, she simply said it was something her mother used to sing. Over dinner, Sam talked about the ranch, the cattle, his plans for expansion. Elena listened attentively, asking intelligent questions about water rights, grazing patterns, and the challenges of dealing with rustlers and raiders. Her questions showed a surprising understanding of ranching that went beyond what he'd expect from a cantina owner's daughter-in-law. You know something about cattle, he observed. I know something about many things, Elena replied, serving him more beef and beans. My first husband taught me that a woman who understands her husband's business is more valuable than one who only knows how to cook and clean. Smart man. Your first husband. Si, Elena said quietly. He was, until the fever took him. Later, as they prepared for bed, Sam watched his new wife brush out her long dark hair. In the lamplight she was undeniably beautiful, but there was something else about her, a quality he couldn't name that both attracted and unsettled him. Elena, he said as she set down the brush, I want you to know that I'm not a cruel man. Treat me with respect. Do your duties as my wife and we'll get along fine. Elena turned to face him, her hair falling like a dark curtain around her shoulders. "And if I told you that respect must be earned, not demanded?" Sam's jaw tightened. "I'd say you still have some learning to do about your place in this marriage." "Perhaps," Elena said, beginning to unbutton her dress. "Or perhaps we both do." As she prepared for her first night as Mrs. Samuel Brennan, Elena's mind was already working, already planning. Sam thought he had purchased a submissive Mexican wife to warm his bed and tend his house. But Elena Vasquez carried secrets in her blood and knowledge in her bones that would change everything Sam Brennan thought he knew about ownership, power, and survival on the dangerous frontier. The wedding night was just the beginning of a much longer, more complex negotiation between two people who each believed they understood exactly what they had gotten themselves into. 3 weeks into their marriage, Sam had begun to think he'd made a shrewd bargain. Elena kept the house spotless, cooked meals that put his former housekeeper to shame, and performed her wifely duties without complaint, though with a distant professionalism that both satisfied and frustrated him. She was proving to be everything he demanded, obedient, efficient, and undeniably attractive. What he hadn't expected was how she'd begun to change the very atmosphere of the ranch. The transformation started small. Elena had rearranged the furniture to create better flow through the rooms, hung colorful woven cloth she'd brought from the cantina, and planted herbs in small pots along the kitchen windowsill. The house felt more like a home and less like a place where a man simply slept between workdays. More surprising was how she interacted with the ranch hands. Where Sam ruled through intimidation and sharp words, Elena seemed to earn respect through quiet competence. She learned their names, brought them cool water during the hottest part of the day, and somehow managed to get more work out of them than Sam's shouting ever had. "That wife of yours is something special," commented Jake Morrison, Sam's foreman, as they watched Elena cross the yard carrying a basket of eggs from the chicken coop. "Got the boys eating out of her hand, and they're working harder than I've seen in years." Sam grunted, unsure whether to be pleased or concerned. Elena moved with purpose across the ranch grounds, studying everything with those intelligent dark eyes. Sometimes he caught her on the front porch at dawn or dusk, looking out toward the hills with an expression he couldn't read. This morning was different. Sam woke before sunrise, as was his habit, but Elena wasn't beside him. Her side of the bed was cold, suggesting she'd been gone for some time. Puzzled, he dressed quickly and went looking for her. She wasn't in the kitchen, though coffee was already brewing and breakfast preparations were laid out. Not in the garden or the chicken coop. Sam was beginning to worry when he heard voices coming from behind the barn. Elena's voice, speaking in rapid, fluent Spanish, and another voice answering her. Sam moved quietly toward the sound, keeping to the shadows. What he saw made his blood run cold. Elena stood facing a man on horseback, a Comanche warrior, his long black hair braided with feathers, his chest bare except for a beaded breastplate. The Indian's paint horse stamped nervously, and Sam could see weapons hanging from the warrior's belt. They were speaking in Spanish, but as Sam watched, Elena switched to another language entirely, something that sounded harsh and guttural. Comanche. His wife was speaking fluent Comanche with a warrior who could have killed every person on the ranch. Sam's hand moved instinctively to his gun, but something made him pause. The conversation didn't sound hostile. Elena's posture was relaxed, almost familiar. The warrior dismounted and approached her, and Sam's heart nearly stopped when Elena embraced the Indian-like family. They spoke for several more minutes in the Comanche tongue, Elena occasionally gesturing toward the house and the surrounding hills. The warrior handed her a small bundle wrapped in hide, which she tucked inside her shawl. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, the Comanche mounted his horse and rode off toward the eastern hills. Elena stood watching until the rider disappeared, then turned toward the house. Sam quickly ducked behind the barn, his mind reeling. When he was sure she was gone, he crept back to the house and slipped into bed, pretending to sleep. Elena entered quietly, moving about the room as she normally did, preparing for the day. But Sam's perception of everything had changed. The woman he thought he'd purchased, the submissive Mexican widow who cooked his meals and warmed his bed, was maintaining secret contact with Comanche warriors. Over breakfast, Sam studied his wife's face, looking for signs of deception or guilt. Elena served him eggs and bacon with the same calm efficiency as always, her expression serene. "Sleep well?" she asked, pouring his coffee. "Like a baby," Sam lied. "You?" "Very well, thank you." She settled across from him with her own cup. "I thought I might ride out today, get better acquainted with the land around the ranch." Sam's jaw tightened. "Why would you need to do that?" Elena shrugged. A woman should know her surroundings, in case of trouble. What kind of trouble? Oh, you know, she said lightly. Rustlers, wild animals, raiders. The frontier can be dangerous for those who aren't prepared. The way she said raiders made Sam's skin crawl. I don't think that's necessary. You have plenty to keep you busy around the house. Eleanor's dark eyes met his. Of course, I was merely thinking of the ranch's security. After breakfast, Sam found reasons to stay close to the house, watching Elena go about her daily routine. She seemed completely normal, tending the garden, cleaning, preparing lunch for the hands. But now Sam saw everything differently. The way she positioned herself to have a clear view of all approaches to the house, how she always seemed to know which direction the wind was blowing, the way she listened to sounds carrying across the valley with an intensity that went beyond casual interest. That afternoon, Jake Morrison rode in with news that made Sam's stomach drop. "Comanche sign on the North Ridge," Jake reported, dismounting near the front porch where Sam and Elena sat in the shade. "Fresh tracks, maybe a day old. Looks like a scouting party." Elena's expression didn't change, but Sam noticed her hands still on the mending in her lap. "How many?" Sam asked. "Hard to say. At least 3, maybe more. They were being careful not to leave much sign." "What do you think they were scouting for?" Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Could be looking for cattle to steal, could be checking our defenses." He glanced at Elena apologetically. "Begging your pardon, ma'am, but sometimes they scout for women to take." "No apology necessary," Elena said calmly. "I'm aware of the dangers." Sam stared at his wife. Any other woman would have shown fear or at least concern. Elena seemed as unruffled as if Jake had reported seeing rabbits in the garden. "I want double guards on the cattle tonight," Sam ordered. "And keep the men close to the main buildings after dark." "Already thought of that, boss. I'll have the boys ready." After Jake left, Sam and Elena sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Sam couldn't contain himself any longer. "You don't seem very worried about Comanche raiders." Elena looked up from her mending. "Should I be?" "Most women would be terrified." "I'm not most women." She set down her needle and thread, giving him her full attention. "Sam, may I ask you something?" "Go ahead. What do you know about the Comanche people? Not the stories you've heard, but what do you actually know?" Sam frowned. "I know they're savages who steal cattle and kidnap women. I know they've killed more settlers in this territory than smallpox and gunfights combined." Elena nodded slowly. "And what if I told you that wasn't the whole truth? I'd say you've been listening to the wrong people." Elena stood and walked to the porch railing, looking out over the valley. "The Comanche call this land Comancheria. They've lived here for generations, following the buffalo herds, raising their families. To them, we're the invaders." "That's ridiculous. This is United States territory now." "According to white man's law, yes." Elena turned back to him. "But law and justice aren't always the same thing, are they?" Sam stood up, his temper rising. "Elena, if you're trying to make me sympathize with murdering savages, I'm trying to help you understand that the world is more complicated than you think." Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "And that the people you call savages might see you the same way." "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" Elena studied his face for a long moment, then smiled slightly. "It means, husband, that you might be surprised what you can learn if you listen instead of just talking." That evening, as they prepared for bed, Sam watched Elena brush her hair in the lamplight. The ritual had become familiar, even comforting, but now it felt loaded with hidden meaning. Everything about his wife seemed different now that he knew her secret. "Elena," he said finally, "is there anything else I should know about you?" She set down the brush and turned to face him. "What do you mean?" "I mean any other surprises I should be prepared for." Elena walked to the window and looked out into the darkness. "Sam, when you married me, you thought you were getting a simple Mexican widow who would cook your meals and ask no questions, weren't you?" "No," she said quietly. "I wasn't. But the question is, what are you going to do now that you're beginning to realize that?" Sam stared at her silhouette against the window, moonlight outlining her figure. "That depends on what exactly you are, if you're not what I thought." Elena turned back to him, her expression serious. "I'm your wife, that much is true, but I'm also a woman with connections you don't understand, knowledge you never suspected, and loyalties that existed long before I met you." "Loyalties to who?" "To my family," Elena said simply. "All of my family." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications Sam was only beginning to grasp. He had thought he was purchasing a wife, But Elena Vasquez Brennan was revealing herself to be something far more complex and potentially dangerous than anything he'd bargained for. As they settled into bed that night, Sam lay awake, staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of the woman beside him. Elena's breathing was even and quiet, but he wondered if she was really asleep or simply waiting, listening, as alert as he was to the sounds of the night and the secrets they both carried. The confrontation Sam had been dreading came 3 days later, triggered by events beyond either of their control. Jake Morrison burst through the front door without knocking, his face grim and his clothes dusty from hard riding. "Sam, we got trouble. Bad trouble." Sam looked up from his morning coffee, Elena beside him at the kitchen table. "What is it?" "The Peterson place, about 10 miles south. Comanche hit them yesterday evening, burned the house, killed Peterson and his oldest boy. Took Mrs. Peterson and the younger children." Elena's cup clinked against her saucer as she set it down, the only sign that the news affected her. Sam noticed her hands were perfectly steady. "Any sign of which band?" Sam asked, reaching for his gun belt. "Tracks suggest it was Red Hawk's group. Sheriff's putting together a posse to track them down. Wants every able-bodied man in the territory to join up." Sam was already strapping on his weapons. "How many riders?" "About 20 so far, but more coming in. We ride out in an hour." As Jake hurried off to gather the ranch hands, Sam turned to Elena. She had risen from the table and was clearing the breakfast dishes with mechanical precision. "I'll be gone at least 3 days, maybe more," he said. "You'll need to stay close to the house. Keep the shotgun loaded." "Of course." Elena's voice was carefully neutral. Sam studied her face, looking for some sign of the emotions she must be feeling. Her people had just murdered a family and kidnapped innocent women and children, yet she showed no shock, no horror, no indication that she found the raid anything but routine news. "Elena," he said slowly, "do you have something to say about what happened to the Petersons?" She looked up from the dishes, her dark eyes meeting his. "What would you like me to say?" "I'd like you to say you're horrified. I'd like you to say that murdering innocent families is wrong no matter who does it." Elena dried her hands carefully on her apron. "The Peterson family is dead. Mrs. Peterson and her children have been taken. That is tragic for them and for anyone who loved them. That's not what I asked." Elena walked to the window, looking out toward the hills where the posse would soon be riding. "Sam, do you know why the Comanche take captives instead of killing everyone? Because they're savages who enjoy making people suffer." "No," Elena said quietly. "They take captives to replace family members lost to disease, warfare, or accidents. Comanche society depends on maintaining population. A captured child can become a full member of the tribe, loved and protected as if born to it." Sam stared at her in disbelief. "Are you defending what happened to those children?" "I'm explaining it. There's a difference." "The hell there is." Sam's voice rose, his temper finally snapping. "Those are white children being taken by murderous savages, and you're talking about it like it's some kind of cultural exchange." Elena turned from the window, her own composure beginning to crack. "And what about Comanche children taken by white soldiers? What about the families burned out when your people decide they want new grazing land? That's different. We're bringing civilization to this territory." "Civilization?" Elena's voice carried a bitter edge Sam had never heard before. "Is that what you call it when the cavalry rides into a peaceful village and kills women and elders? When they burn food stores that will leave families starving through winter?" Sam took a step toward her, his face darkening. "Elena, I'm warning you." "Warning me of what?" She didn't back down, didn't flinch from his approach. "Warning me not to speak truths that make you uncomfortable. Warning you to remember which side you're on." The words exploded out of him with more force than he'd intended, and in the silence that followed, both of them realized they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Elena's expression grew very still. "Which side, Sam? You're my wife. You live in my house under my protection. Your loyalty should be to me and to the people I call neighbors." "Should be," Elena repeated softly. "But what if my loyalty was claimed long before I ever met you?" Sam felt something cold settle in his chest. "What are you saying?" Elena walked to the kitchen table and sat down, her hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was calm again, but Sam could hear the steel underneath. "My mother was Comanche, taken as a young woman during a raid on a Mexican settlement, raised by the band that captured her. She married a Comanche warrior and had 3 children. Sam's mouth went dry. "Elena, the cholera came when I was 12. It killed my father, my 2 brothers, and many others. My mother, fearing I would die too, took me to her sister, who had married a Mexican man in Laredo. I was raised Mexican from that point on, but I never forgot where I came from. The kitchen seemed to spin around Sam. "You're telling me you're half Comanche?" "I'm telling you that the warrior you saw me speaking with 3 days ago was my cousin. That Red Hawk, who led the raid on the Peterson place, is my uncle, and that everything you think you know about this conflict is seen very differently by the people who share my blood." Sam sank into a chair, his mind reeling. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you demanded to know which side I'm on, and I'm trying to help you understand that the world isn't divided into simple sides." Elena leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "The Comanche are fighting for their survival, Sam. Every piece of land taken for ranches like yours is land where they can no longer hunt, no longer live as they always have. Every treaty your government makes gets broken when it becomes inconvenient. So you support what they did to the Peterson family?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. "I mourn the death of innocents no matter what color their skin, but I also understand why desperate people do desperate things." Sam stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I have to go. The posse is waiting." "Sam." "No." He held up a hand, stopping her. "I can't. I need time to think about this." He was at the door when Elena's voice stopped him. "The children they took will be treated well, fed, clothed, protected. In time they may even come to love their new families." Sam turned back, his face hard. "And that's supposed to make me feel better?" "It's supposed to help you understand that not everything is as black and white as you want it to be." Sam stared at his wife, this woman he'd thought he was purchasing like livestock, who had just revealed herself to be connected by blood to the very people he was riding out to fight. "When I get back," he said quietly, "we're going to have a much longer conversation about exactly where your loyalties lie." "Yes," Elena agreed. "We are." Sam rode out with the posse 30 minutes later, his mind churning with questions and doubts. Behind him, Elena stood on the front porch watching the riders disappear into the distance. In her hand was the small bundle her cousin had given her 3 days earlier, a message from her uncle Red Hawk that the raid on the Peterson place was only the beginning. The territorial governor was sending in more cavalry troops. The Comanche were being pushed toward a final confrontation that would determine whether they could continue to exist as a free people or would be forced onto reservations like defeated enemies. Elena touched the turquoise stone hidden beneath her dress and whispered a prayer in the language of her childhood. The war between two worlds was escalating, and she found herself caught in the middle, married to a man who represented everything her blood family was fighting against, yet bound by honor and growing affection to a husband who might soon see her as the enemy. The next few days would test loyalties, challenge assumptions, and force both Elena and Sam to confront the reality that love and war could exist in the same heart, making choices that seemed impossible and consequences that neither had fully anticipated. As the dust from the posse's departure settled over the ranch, Elena began to prepare for possibilities that Sam couldn't imagine, and for decisions that would define not just her marriage, but her very identity in a land where survival often meant choosing between the family of your birth and the family of your choice. Sam returned from the unsuccessful 3-day hunt, bloodied, exhausted, and carrying news that would change everything. The posse had found the Comanche trail, but lost it in the rocky terrain near Devil's Canyon. Worse, they'd encountered a much larger war party than expected, at least 50 warriors, not the small raiding band they'd anticipated. 2 posse members were dead, and several others wounded, including Sam himself, who bore a deep gash along his left arm from a Comanche lance. Elena was waiting on the porch when the survivors limped back to the ranch. She took one look at Sam's pale face and blood-stained shirt, and immediately went into action, helping him from his horse and supporting him into the house without a word about their unfinished argument. "Sit," she ordered, guiding him to a kitchen chair. "Let me see that arm." Sam was too exhausted to protest as she cut away his torn sleeve and examined the wound. Her touch was gentle but efficient as she cleaned the gash with whiskey, causing him to hiss in pain. "It's deep but clean," she said, beginning to stitch the wound with steady hands. "You're lucky it didn't hit the bone." "Lucky," Sam repeated bitterly. Bill Thompson wasn't so lucky. Neither was young Martinez. Both dead because we walked into an ambush. Elena's hands stilled for a moment. "I'm sorry for your friends." "Are you?" Sam's pale eyes studied her face. "Or are you sorry we didn't lose more men?" Elena resumed her stitching, her voice carefully controlled. "I'm sorry that good men died, because 2 peoples can't find a way to live on the same land without bloodshed. It's too late for that kind of thinking, Elena. This is war now. The territorial governor is sending in 2 companies of cavalry. Orders are to hunt down every Comanche band in the territory and either kill them or force them onto the reservation. Elena's needle paused again. All of them? Every last one. Sam watched her face carefully, including your Uncle Red Hawk. Elena finished the last stitch and tied off the thread, then began wrapping his arm with clean cloth. And what happens to the women and children? Reservation, if they surrender. Otherwise, Sam shrugged with his good shoulder. Otherwise, they die with their men. That's their choice to make. Elena stood and began cleaning up the medical supplies. What if there was another way? Such as? Elena walked to the window, looking out toward the hills where she knew her people were hiding. What if someone could convince Red Hawk to take his band north, beyond the territorial boundaries, to join the northern Comanche who are still free? Sam leaned back in his chair, studying his wife. Someone like who? Someone he trusts, someone who speaks his language and understands both worlds. Someone like you. Elena turned from the window. Yes. Sam was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the implications of what she was suggesting. Elena, what you're talking about is treason. You'd be helping enemies of the United States escape justice. I'd be helping my family avoid genocide. They murdered the Peterson family, and if they stay, they'll all be murdered in return, including women and children who had nothing to do with that raid. Elena moved closer, her voice urgent. Sam, you've seen what the cavalry does to Indian camps. You know it's not just warriors who die. Sam looked at his bandaged arm, thinking of Bill Thompson's widow and Martinez's young bride. Why should I care if a bunch of murdering savages get what's coming to them? Elena's eyes flashed with anger, but she controlled her voice. Because you're better than that. Because somewhere inside the man who bought me like cattle is someone who knows the difference between justice and slaughter. You think pretty highly of me for someone who was forced to marry me. Elena sat down across from him, her expression serious. Sam, I need to tell you something else. Something I should have said before. Sam braced himself for another revelation. Miguel didn't have to offer me to pay his debt. I volunteered. Sam stared at her. What? When Miguel told me about his situation, I suggested the marriage arrangement. I needed protection, a new identity, a place where I could be safe while staying close to my people. You're saying you manipulated me. I'm saying I made a choice, just as you did. But what started as necessity has become something else. Sam's voice was carefully neutral. What kind of something else? Elena reached across the table and touched his uninjured hand. The kind where I find myself caring what happens to a stubborn rancher who thinks he can solve everything with threats and gunfire. Sam looked down at her hand covering his. Elena, if I help you warn your people, I'm betraying everything I believe in. And if you don't, you're condemning people I love to death for the crime of trying to remain free on their own land. Sam was quiet for several minutes, staring at their joined hands. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of an impossible decision. If I did this, and I'm not saying I will, what would you need? Elena's eyes brightened with hope. Fast horse, a day's head start before you report my disappearance, and your promise that you won't guide the cavalry to the places where I might have gone. And then what? You disappear into Comancheria forever? Elena squeezed his hand. Then I come back to my husband and try to build a life that honors both sides of my heritage. The cavalry won't just give up, Elena. They'll keep hunting. But if Red Hawk's band is gone, they'll focus on other targets. My uncle is smart enough to stay ahead of soldiers if he has enough warning. Sam pulled his hand free and stood up, walking to the window. Outside, the ranch looked peaceful in the afternoon sun, but he knew that peace was an illusion. War was coming whether he helped Elena or not. The only question was how many innocent people would die in the process. There's something else you need to know, he said without turning around. The cavalry colonel, Marcus Wade, he's not like other officers. He doesn't just want to defeat the Comanche. He wants to exterminate them completely. He's already talking about pursuing any bands that flee the territory. Elena joined him at the window. Then we need to move quickly. Sam turned to face her. We? You're coming with me? Elena, that's impossible. I can't just abandon my ranch. Jake can manage things for a few days. You know the country better than I do, and you speak enough Spanish to help if we encounter Mexican authorities. Sam realized she had been planning this conversation, perhaps for days. You've thought this all through, haven't you? I've thought about little else since you rode out with the posse. Sam studied his wife's face. This woman who had revealed herself to be so much more than he'd bargained for. Elena, if we do this and get caught, they'll hang us both for treason. And if we don't do this, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I could have saved my family and chose not to. Sam was quiet for a long moment, weighing everything he'd believed against everything he was learning about himself. Finally, he sighed deeply. "When do we leave?" Elena's smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. "Tonight, after the ranch hands are asleep." They rode out in the pre-dawn darkness, taking the most remote trails Sam knew through terrain that would hide their passage. Elena had changed into riding clothes and carried supplies in saddlebags, including the small bundle her cousin had given her weeks earlier, a detailed map of the secret routes and hidden water sources known only to the Comanche. 3 days later, they found Red Hawk's band camped in a hidden canyon 50 miles north of the ranch. The reunion between Elena and her uncle was emotional but brief. There was no time for lengthy explanations when cavalry patrols were already scouring the territory. Sam found himself sitting around a Comanche fire, eating food prepared by people he'd been taught to see as savage enemies, watching Elena translate between him and warriors who regarded him with suspicion but growing respect. When Red Hawk learned that Sam had risked everything to help his niece warn the band, the old war chief's attitude toward the white rancher shifted noticeably. "He says you have honor," Elena translated. "That few white men would choose family over their own people." "Tell him I'm not choosing sides," Sam replied. "I'm choosing what's right." After Elena translated, Red Hawk spoke again, longer this time, his weathered face serious. "He says the world is changing too fast for old ways to survive unchanged, that perhaps the future belongs to people who can build bridges between worlds, like his niece and her husband." 2 days later, Red Hawk's entire band, 47 men, women, and children, slipped away toward the northern territories under cover of a spring blizzard that would hide their tracks. Sam and Elena returned to the ranch, arriving just as Jake Morrison was preparing to send out search parties. "Where the hell have you been?" Jake demanded. "I thought Comanche had gotten you both." "Scouting the North Range," Sam said calmly. "Wanted to make sure none of Red Hawk's warriors were hiding up there." Jake accepted the explanation without question, and life at the ranch resumed its normal rhythm. When Colonel Wade arrived a week later with his cavalry, he found no trace of the Comanche band that had been terrorizing the territory. The tracks led nowhere, the hiding places were empty, and the local ranchers, including Sam Brennan, had no useful information to offer. "Damned Indians vanished like smoke," Wade complained to Sam over dinner. "It's like they knew we were coming." "Comanche are tricky that way," Sam agreed, refilling the colonel's whiskey glass. "Lucky for us, they decided to move on." 6 months later, Elena was hanging laundry in the yard when she spotted a familiar figure on horseback, watching from a distant ridge. Her cousin sat motionless for several minutes, then raised his hand in a brief salute before disappearing over the hill. The message was clear. The band had reached safety and was thriving in their new territory. That evening, as Sam and Elena sat on their front porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and red, she told him about the sighting. "Any regrets?" Sam asked, taking her hand in his. Elena considered the question seriously. "About helping my family escape? No. About marrying you? That's more complicated." Sam raised an eyebrow. "Complicated how?" "I married you thinking I was making a sacrifice to protect the people I loved. I didn't expect to discover that I was also choosing a man I could love." Sam lifted their joined hands and kissed her knuckles. "For what it's worth, I bought you thinking I was getting a housekeeper who wouldn't talk back. I didn't expect to get a wife who would change everything I thought I knew about right and wrong." Elena leaned against his shoulder. "Think we can make this work? A Comanche woman and a Texas rancher?" "Well," Sam said, tightening his arm around her, "we've survived everything the frontier could throw at us so far. I figure if we can get through war, deception, and your uncle trying to scalp me that first night in camp, we can probably handle being married." Elena laughed, the sound carrying across the valley where cattle grazed peacefully under the endless western sky. "He wasn't really going to scalp you. He was just testing to see if you would run." "Good to know," Sam said dryly, though I would have preferred a less dramatic test of my character. As darkness settled over the ranch, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about their plans for expanding the house, their hopes for the future, and the complex dance of building a life together when you come from different worlds, but share the same stubborn determination to make impossible things work. Elena had been right about one thing. The world was changing too fast for old ways to survive unchanged, but perhaps in the space between two cultures, there was room for something new to grow, something that honored the past, while embracing a future where love could cross any boundary, and bridges could be built even in the aftermath of war. The rancher who had once declared, "You're mine now," had learned that true possession came not from ownership, but from partnership, while the woman who had spoken Comanche in secret had discovered that home could be found in the most unexpected places with the most unlikely people. Their story would continue to unfold under the vast Texas sky, written not in the language of conquest or submission, but in the patient daily work of two people choosing each other, again and again, despite all the reasons the world gave them to remain apart.